In today's lesson, we're going to do about urban challenges in an emerging country. I'm going to choose the city of Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, which is in the background here. This is for the IGCSE spec on urban environment 6.2c. You have to have a named example of urban challenges in an emerging or developing city. So here is a satellite image of Rio de Janeiro, which in 1960, the wider metropolitan area would have been 5 million. And we can see, just by looking at this satellite image from 2020, that there has been a huge growth in the population. It's 12.7 million in this latter picture. The first picture, the satellite image, was taken in the 80s, and this is in the 2020s. But we can see there's a huge amount of population growth, huge urbanization happening in this area. The main cause behind that urbanization is what we've done before, is rural to urban migration. So there's been a significant amount of migration from places like the northeast, but also some from the south, and it's all gone to the southeast where these big conurbations like Rio de Janeiro and Sao Paulo are. Obviously, there are reasons why rural to urban migration happens. And here I've included a map of Brazil which shows the regions, and it shows you what the GDP of those areas would be if they were countries. And we can see down where Rio de Janeiro is and Sao Paulo, then that is equivalent to being like a European country like Slovakia or Estonia. However, if I look in this top right-hand corner, we've got places in the northeast which are like very, very poor developing countries like the Dominican Republic. So there is a huge gap in economics here. The southeast has GDP per capita of 15,000 plus, while we've got below 5,000 in the northeast. So there's an economic incentive for people to migrate. But also there is push factors. So in the northeast, there would be lots of droughts that seasonally happen, and these are getting worse due to climate change. And so people that might have been farmers might just realise it's too difficult to live there, and therefore move to southeast where there is opportunities and the draw of the big city. Once people have migrated to places like Rio, this is where we get our urban challenges. So one of the biggest urban challenges we can see here, this is a favela. So favelas only occur due to a lack of formal housing. So when there is a lot of people that go into a city, there isn't enough housing, normal constructed housing, to be able to meet that need. And so squatter settlements, or what we would call slums in other areas, but what we call in South America a favela, they pop up. These are unplanned, they're not planned or sanctioned by the government. So they're often on land that they don't have the rights to. They often, because of that, have to go on land that is unwanted. So we can see in the top right-hand corner here, this is on a hillside. So this is land that isn't really particularly suitable for normal formal housing. And so these squatter settlements pop up. And this happens because so many people are moving in that the needs of housing for these people can't be met. And therefore they have to kind of make other alternatives. We can see from this map of the wider metropolitan area of Rio de Janeiro that there are an incredible amount of favelas. The purple and blue areas are the favelas, and there's between 700 and 1,000 in Rio. The reason they don't know exact figures is because there are literally so many that pop up and kind of disappear over time. We can see that they're spread out pretty much the whole metropolitan area, more slightly in the east than in the west. But we can see that there is a significant amount spread out in these little patches all over the area. The significant fact is this is such a big problem that it's because 25% of people who live in Rio de Janeiro live in these conditions. They can become pretty established. So even though they are squatter settlements, they're informal, they're not sanctioned. If they've been there a long enough time, then the infrastructure starts to kind of become slightly more permanent. This is a place that has got 100,000 people living in it. So it's almost a city within a city. So these are kind of places that stick around. However, the challenges are quite significant. So we can see on this left-hand side, because they're not planned, the electricity and water supplies often have to be either made makeshift by the people who live there, so not always by experts, or sometimes they are just literally tapped and stolen from official sources. So you can have problems here, fires can start, that it's not a regular supply. So this is a significant problem. We can see here on the right that this is one of the houses in the favela, and it's actually been built up over time. So in the ground floor was built 50 years ago, 25 years ago, the first floor, and now a new floor is being built. These are self-made, so the residents build these up over time, and when they have money, which often isn't in continuous supply, and sometimes that means scrap metals and materials can be made, which doesn't mean that the buildings are always really kind of proofed against any kind of disaster. And so when sometimes they're built on really steep slopes, like in this example in Rio, therefore they are subject to landslides. So we have these houses that are kind of self-built, and some of them can make really great houses, but they are at risk, especially because they're on land that they don't really have rights to, and so they often have to choose land that no one else really wants to use. So these are places that are kind of significantly on issues of falling down in some places. Obviously, when you don't plan a settlement, you don't plan for the other things like sewage and sanitation. And so we can see here that this boy is playing amongst an area where waste is just being dumped, and here sewage is just pouring straight out onto the street. So we know that the kind of waste isn't dealt with well, and when the waste isn't dealt with in these really densely populated areas, that means diseases can spread, people can pick up from their water might get contaminated, and therefore there is lots of potential problems that could that happen to the residents here in terms of health care. Another example of this is the bay in Rio de Janeiro, and the houses there just dump the waste straight into the bay. And that's because they don't have sewers, so they don't have anywhere to get rid of it properly or to get it treated, and so it goes straight into the bay. This was an issue because when they had the Olympics there, they basically had to spend millions of pounds cleaning up the bay because it was a place going to be for the sailing. So it was a real issue that kind of became apparent to the wider public around the world when there was the Olympics in Brazil. As we said, there were so many people going into Rio de Janeiro. That also means that there aren't enough jobs to go along with the housing. So we get a really large informal sector. So 40% of the city is working in the informal sector. And this is because there aren't enough jobs to go around. And so you often find people like these guys selling stuff on the streets to try and make kind of ends meet. We talk about that a little bit more in depth in the economic activity section of the course. Obviously, when there aren't enough jobs to go around, sometimes people are forced to kind of go into activities that are also informal but also risky, so it can lead to crime and illegal activities, and drug trafficking is a really big problem in favelas, and actually drug gangs and traffickers run a significant amount of the favelas. This means obviously the police go in there to try and solve problems, and therefore this can lead to problems where you get gangs and police attacking each other, which means that there are other issues such as really high murder rates there due to these regular clashes. So all of these kind of wider social problems, the waste, the threats of gangs, the poor income because of there's not enough jobs, these can all have a wider impact on people's health. And so if you live in the rest of Rio, you've got a life expectancy of 68, which is okay for a kind of emerging country. But if you live in a favela, it's, at worst 20 years less than that. So it shows you how the challenges that certain people face in the city are significant. Other issues that we might expect that we've kind of talked about before: traffic congestion, put more people in a city, especially a city that is different parts of it aren't planned very well. You're going to have a lot more cars, and that's going to produce a lot more pollution. Rio de Janeiro is one of the most congested cities in South America, even though it's tried to update its infrastructure since having the Olympics there. If I put loads of cars on the road, they produce a lot of pollution, and therefore I'm going to get smog like we saw in the Hong Kong case study. And the air pollution is so bad that it's actually 3 times over what the World Health Organization would consider to be safe. We can therefore see there's lots of interconnected urban challenges here caused by a growing population.